am Paulette Grune, and I have been doing custom sewing, recreating Victorian clothing. Since joining the Nevada Civil War Volunteers 23 years ago and finding that you couldn't buy the sort of clothing that we need, I've made it my business to learn how Victorian ladies dress themselves and why, and to duplicate the clothing. So that's what we'll be presenting to you today. I think first of all we want to start by how you can identify the period I represent is 1860 to 1865, and you can tell by looking at this little snapshot of my mama that ladies have their hair parted in the center, and you'll find that boys and gentlemen will have their hair parted on the side. So in a lot of the Victorian photographs, that's how you can tell the boy children from the girl children, because they're all dressed in gowns. You know, when they're babies, they're dressed in gowns. And boys and girls alike, probably all in white because of boiling them in the pot with the Lysol out back to clean them. There wasn't a pink and blue distinction in Victorian period. The babies were all dressed in white. Okay? So that's how you can tell just sort of in photographs that you see the boys from the girls. Oftentimes little boys will have ringlets down until father says it's okay to cut his hair, or mother can bear it, you know, to cut off his curls. Oftentimes babies are not even named until it's likely that they will survive. And then in a upper middle class or wealthy family, there will be the presentation. And when mother holds child's gown is as long as mother's. And that shows the money you have to waste on lingerie and things for little children. And then those gowns will be shortened up to knee length for crawling and walking. When they start to creep about and to learn to stand, then those gowns are made short enough that the children can walk about. It's still pantalette and still slip and still tunic on boys and girls alike. And then gradually the little boys' tunics are shortened so that the little short pants show. The boys wear short pants until they're about 7 or 8. Then they go into knickers, and the knickers until they're 11 or 12 before they have long pants. So in photographs, you can kind of judge the age of this child when you're doing documentation or looking in antique stores or whatever. That will give you a little glimpse as far as whether it's a boy or a girl. Now the little girls' dresses go from knee length, and they will start back down. And you can tell the age of a little girl by the length of her dress. And when it does touch on the floor again like her mother's, she's ready to receive serious courting and start behaving more maturely. Okay? When she's young, her hair is allowed to flow down her back. And then when she decides she's old enough to start receiving serious suitors and becoming mature and acting grown up and those sorts of things, then the hair becomes confined somehow at the back of her head, either in a hairnet like Joanna's wearing here in the back. This keeps the hair from getting tangled when you're doing your work chores, or riding especially. When they're riding, there's the hairnet or the bun or something like that with their riding clothing. Keeps it out of the way. If you have money for a maid devoted to your services only, then we do the sort of thing I've done with my hair. And we have the curls and all that sort of thing. This takes a lot of sitting in the kitchen with the curling iron on the wood stove, you know. And we have no problem with hair pieces in Victorian time, and it doesn't matter whether it matches or not. Doesn't necessarily need to be the same color as your own hair, but we did pin on a lot of hair pieces. One of the questions I'm asked often is makeup and that sort of thing. And the answer is yes, we did have makeup. We used rice powder, we used pearl dust to even out our complexion. It's important that we look pale so that it's obvious we don't have to go out and help with the chores and those sorts of things. As you can see, I'm supervising laundry and canning and some of those things. So I don't have as much help as I would like to have. So I'm a little brown on my forearms, so I have been helping a little bit with some of the chores. But those are some of the things you want to look for and that I've researched and like to present to people. I think what we'll do is go ahead and dress, and then we can answer questions as we go along. If something occurs to you, do ask, because years of research is hard to relay in an hour. So you just have to kind of, if something crosses your mind, do ask. What I'm wearing is called a wrapper. This is a dressing gown. It's big enough that it could go over hoop skirts to go down to breakfast in the morning, to visit with my husband over his paper, and that sort of thing. So this is technically a bathrobe. And what we're going to do is dispense with this. And I'd like you to notice that although Victorian ladies have no lower appendages, we like very fancy stockings. Oh. And so these I hand embroidered at Jessie Reno days because I couldn't sit with idle hands, and so I had to do something. So I embroidered my stockings just in case they should ever show. Underneath are pantalettes. Okay, pantalettes. In the beginning were two separate legs with a string about that top. Okay. And the story goes that Mrs. Smith was walking along the boardwalk and felt something come untied and slide down. And so in walking along, she simply kicked her foot loose and walked away and left it on the boardwalk. And she said that was appalling enough. But the next week at tea, she saw Mrs. Brown wearing it as an ascot about her neck. did not embarrass the woman by revealing the source of the lace that she had recovered. And so now our pantalettes are a common waistband. They go from button in the back all the way around and buttonhole the other side. So the legs are attached to something now so that we don't have that accident happen again. On top, I'm wearing a chemise. This could be a nightgown. It could be my undershirt. Depending on your financial status, wealthy people would have as many as 30. So they could be sent to the laundry, or you account for time for the laundress if you employ a full-time laundress to do the laundry and get it washed and dried and ironed and back in your bureau. And so farm people probably would have maybe two, wear one all week, and when it was time to wash, you change. And then you wear that one a week until time to do laundry again, if you're blessed by having to. So the whole perspective of Victorian lifestyle depends on your financial stabilization. How much fabric you can afford to cover the hoops with, and how well you can dress yourself, how many parties you can have, and whom you invite depends on where you're received, and all those sorts of things. And so there's an awful lot of fitting into and trying to attain a higher social status. We're always trying to fit into the next financial plateau in progressing our husband's work and our financial stability. So there's a lot of interacting with people in your class and hoping to step into the next financial class. And this is the first time in history that the middle class exists in America, because there are rich, the nobility, and there are the poor in the European countries and in Great Britain. And in America, we have established a middle class, a working middle class. During the Civil War, which is where my research lies, this is the first time that ladies actually work outside the home, is during the Civil War, because so many men are away fighting or have already been sacrificed to the war effort. And so ladies are being called upon to do work that they've never been allowed to do before. First of all, we're so addle-brained and so faint that we can't handle a lot of stress as far as working outside of the home. And the other is we're probably not too smart because we've not been educated. Girls were not even educated, except the rich did go to colleges and those sorts of things. So in farm families, girls were married off because girls could not inherit anything. They were just another mouth to feed, in spite of the fact that they assisted the mother with all of the housework and the sewing and the mending and all the chores and things. The girls were considered dispensable and would be married off, where the boys would be the ones who would inherit the property and were stronger to do more of the work. This is the first place where ladies did, in fact, become school teachers as one occupation. They were clerks in mercantiles, even in banks, the post office ladies were postmasters for the first time during the Civil War. So this is a very fascinating time in history. I want to point out, do look around, ladies, after we break for lunch, at the props that I have the pitcher and bowl, you know, that's our bathtub, because it takes a lot of people to haul enough water for us to actually bathe. And so we do our sponge bath thing with the pitcher and bowl, and then the things that touch us are laundry. And that's kind of thinking during the Civil War, Victorian period. And the other thing is washing the hair. That's one of the main things, especially school children are appalled that we don't wash our hair every day. We might wash our hair once a month, depending on how quickly you can get it dry to retire to a cold bedroom. Because we do not have central heating. Most often, the bedrooms have no fireplaces. And so you want to make sure that your hair is thoroughly dry before you retire to a cold bed chamber. So that's not your priority. Unless you have a nice sunny day and nothing else to do, or you can take your mending outside, or supervise the laundry and stand about in the sunshine so that your hair can get dry. That's not a priority. And our number one focus is our own well-being, our health. And so anything that is detrimental to your well-being, you want to caution against in Victorian period. Although tight lacing seems to not be one of those priorities. Yes, ma'am?
I thought most of the women, you said that they would have hair pieces. I thought most of the women just grew their hair long.
They had very long hair, most of them, but oftentimes it was thin. Okay, and if they were going to a special social function or something,
I'm agony just watching
it would not.
I also know that
Very good with wash.
that recent PBS one that was the one from Great Britain, where the people lived as they would have in Victorian times.
Yes, ma'am.
The biggest complaint they had was no shampoo.
Mm-hmm.
And they tried everything they could think of to use to wash hair. And their hair was so dry, so brittle,
conditioners,
it
yes.
started breaking and everything.
Mhm.
And it was the one thing they cheated on.
Mm-hmm.
Mom and the girls went to the store and they could only buy what was available in, I think it was the 1880s.
Yes.
So the one day they said they couldn't stand it anymore. Their
Right.
hair was driving them crazy and they cheated and bought actual shampoo.
I saw part of that was the time where they were talking about how you feel and how much work it was.
Yes,
and
yes.
What they thought they could do in a week took them much longer.
Yes,
than
exactly.
Yeah.
We
so
don't.
they had a store set up that they could.
No, they could actually go to, the one at
Ladies,
they could actually go to the
Get
market.
back to your program, thank you.
They would use lanolin and rose water and all those sorts of things, but the brushing was the main thing. Lots and lots of brushing. Now let me show how far apart we are here in the back. Okay, we're going to 2 inches. And the purpose of going to 2 inches is so that the rest of my clothing will fit. But what I'd like you to understand is there are steel stays in this corset. Okay? And the steel stays take up at least 2 inches of room. And so we have to pull that 2 inches back out to get me back to my natural waist size. Okay? I am trick tied at the top, so it's not going to push on my lungs. Okay? And you need to understand that from the time a little girl was born, she wore a belly band to protect the cord. We didn't have the little plastic clip that we have now. So there was a band of cotton cloth that was wound around until the umbilical cord came off. And then she went into a little quilted stay. And then she went into a stay that had little slats of wood. And then she would go into the watch spring steel and the whalebone. And so all of our lives, we're corseted in one manner or another. You don't suddenly turn 15 and decide you're going to put a corset on to catch a bow. This is something you've done your whole life. You don't know anything any different. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pull this down. Let me get over the chair.
Were there health problems attributed to the corset?
Very many, very many. Miscarriages was one of the main ones. Oftentimes ladies would lace too tightly because of an upcoming social event that they were determined to go to. even though, they were,
Half because you washed it.
okay.
Just washed it, it's all they just snag it. This is two or three from that. You agree?
Yeah, I'm fine. But there were many health problems. I have understood that there were ladies who had their lower rib removed to maintain a small waistline. I can't imagine that if you never let your husband see you in the altogether, why would you let a doctor? So I just kind of wonder how true that is. I was told when I first started doing this research that you don't necessarily repeat something that you read once. You want to document it at least 3 times, and if you get the same piece of information, then it might be true. Okay, how are we now, ladies?
Oh my God, you're smart.
Okay, now I should be what I am normally. Because there is so much steel in here, it does take up an awful lot of room. So we take me back down to my natural waist size. Okay? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put an under petticoat on. And the purpose of the under petticoat is to cut the draft from the pantalettes. Because they are open from center front to center back, there is that little breezeway. And so we always put an under petticoat under. And this one does have vintage trim on the bottom. I had the trim and bought fabric that was slightly off-white to match it. And the more I've laundered it, the whiter the vintage gets. So I didn't realize that it was age-stained. And so now my petticoat's a shade darker than my trim because I didn't wash it enough times before I made the petticoat to match the color it was then. So that's one of my little screw-ups. And that's how you learn about Victorian things, is by trial and error, by doing things and more research. Okay, now we're going to put the cage crinoline. We'll do that later. You need to understand that the cage crinoline, or the hoop skirt, if you will, replaced as many as 13 starched and ironed petticoats. Okay, so they would be piled atop, piled atop, piled atop for what I'm wearing. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the cage on, and as you can see, I can't do this by myself now. So if I'm going to spend the money to dress like this, I have to have help.
So every lady had a dress.
In upper middle class, you would have to have somebody to do your hair, to help you with your clothing, and it was a full-time job for her to maintain your clothing. To brush soils away when you returned from visiting a friend or something, to maintain the mending, you know, to see that the laundress had everything just to your liking. Thank you. Thank you.
So you're saying the hoop replaced all of those?
Replaced as many as 13 starched and ironed petticoats to pile atop one another. Can you imagine if you got caught in a rainstorm with 13 petticoats to drag home with you? So this thing is just like the grandest invention we've ever heard of. There probably were more patents for hoop skirts than we can even number. I know I've seen at least 1,000 documented for different types of hoop skirts because everybody was always inventing, everybody had a better idea, you know, just like today. Everybody always has a better idea, so you try something else. But innovation was becoming very, very popular. There were more patents for things during the Civil War than every patent before the Civil War added up together. We had the sewing machine in the early 1850s. During the Civil War, we had telegraph, we had washing machine, which was like a churn dasher, okay? So they were just patenting things like crazy. There was a lantern with a reflective panel in the back. So you didn't have just candlelight, you had a reflective shield in the back that broadcast the light. And just all sorts of things that were invented during the Civil War. So the cages were not any different than anything else. This one is metal banding, cased inside tapes, okay, supported by the waistband and the vertical tapes, and then the ruffle on the bottom. The bands do come out so that you can wash the part that drags in the dirt, okay? There were hoop skirts with pockets full of straw. There were hoop skirts with pockets full of horsehair. There were hoop skirts that had tabs that came out over the waistband, and you could pull and it would lift this up so you could get through mud puddles and things without soiling the hem of your dress. There was even one that had a rubber pouch on the bottom that could have water pumped into it, because the fire danger was so great that ladies were catching on fire. That was the second leading cause of death after childbirth, was fire, because of our big dresses, and everything was open fire. Fireplace and wood stove, that was our source of any type of heat, cooking and that sort of thing. So ladies were always catching on fire. And so this was one of the inventions with the pouch full of water to help alleviate a fire circumstance.
Paulette,
Yes, ma'am.
did you make that one yourself?
I did. This is the second one. And I have to tell you, this was so important to me that I took all of the metal out of all of the bands and washed them for you. I was embarrassed when I realized how dirty it really was, because I always wash the straps and the ruffle, but I hadn't ever taken all the bands out. You can't wash a band full of metal because they will rust, so I took the whole thing all apart and cleaned it for you ladies. So now I'm nice and clean, just like brand new. Okay, so what we do is we cover up those metal bands with a nice petticoat, because we don't want those metal bands showing through our silk dress. Okay, the ridges to show. That shows that you're either stretching your silk too tight, or you've not bothered to put the proper undergarments between the silk and the hoop skirt. So, this one, I am accused of looking like a bride or a wedding cake when I go to the schools to talk to the children. I just am really fond of the flouncing and the eyelet. I thought was very pretty. This is probably 18, maybe 20 years old, my petticoat. I've been wearing it that long. Okay, we're going to put the skirt on now, and I want you to notice the fullness of the skirt. I do a minimum of 5 yards in my skirts so that there is no pulling. It's not snug at all around the bottom, and everything is nice pleated. And the bodice will go to this when we get to there. Not yet. Okay, so notice how nice and full it is.
Is it fun?
It's wonderful. I'd like to share for just a minute how I decided to do this. I was the secretary in a construction company, and the man who did the interior design of the Comstock Hotel in Reno did that interior design in the conference room of the construction company where I worked. And so I walked on carpet samples, and I looked at silverware and wallpaper and all that sort of thing in this. My boss was the brainchild of the Comstock Hotel, and the company that I worked for built it. So the architect and I got to be really good friends. So when the hotel opened, he went on a vacation, and he came back from Indiana telling about Civil War reenacting. And since I was born in Mississippi, all I could see was parasols and petticoats, and I want to do that. And so I decided that I would make it my business to learn about lifestyles during the Civil War, and how ladies conducted themselves and behaved, and what their priorities were, what they felt was important. And a lot of what was important to them was the moral and cultural education of their children, appropriately decorating without overly embellishing their homes. They did a lot of needlework and those sorts of things. It showed how proud you were of your home and your family to do a lot of needlework and have things displayed nicely. And the other purpose for a lady, a wife, and mother was to save her husband from his base behavior, because men did tend to gamble and to drink and to smoke and fraternize in places maybe they shouldn't. And so she was after his moral well-being as well as her own. And so that was part of her responsibility in her marriage. waistband because you don't ever want to reach and have your chemise or your corset or anything to show if you should reach. Typically, all dresses, except in working class or lower class families, rural families, typically a dress consists of 2 pieces in identical fabric, except the young people have adopted the blouse and skirt that mismatch. Okay, so what we're doing is we're fastening the skirt and bodice together so that we don't have any gapping.
When you're finished, how many pounds of clothing are you gonna have?
12 to 15. In the wintertime, they weigh a lot more because I wear corduroy and I wear wool.
Where do you find your patterns to make those garments?
There are a multitude of patterns now available, some good, some not so good. This needs to twist just a little to the right. There. Okay, let's show the shimmy set. Okay, if this dress, let's just pretend, if this dress were a V-neck or square neck afternoon gown, we would put this little shimmy set in here underneath because we show no skin until 3 o'clock tea time. And so this would go under here if it were a lower neck gown. Okay? Just so you understand the covering thing. It's very important that you be respectable and respected in your community. And so you abide by all the moral issues, and the fashion dictates, by time of day, dictates the type of dress that you wear and what you wear that type of dress to. This is going to be a dress for receiving guests, and that's why I didn't point out about my shoes. My shoes are house shoes because I'm not going to be going out very far. They're made for staying home, for in the house. Nice little Louis heel, something kind of fancy, and very comfortable. Now, what I would like to point out is Joanna's wearing a boot, and this is the sort of thing that the working class would wear. And also, if I were going to go out, other than just to step into the carriage and to get out of the carriage at a neighbor's home, wherever I was visiting, I could do that in the shoes I'm wearing. But if I were going to travel, if I were going to ride, we did ride side saddle. We did not ride astride. Perhaps out in the West, trousers and riding astride had been adopted. But typically in the more genteel societies, we would have ridden side saddle and we would have worn a boot for any kind of walking or any kind of travel. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to fasten me up.
I also understand that the reason men's shirts button differently from women's shirts is because of this right here. When they
The
started
convenience
using
of
buttons,
the dresser.
it was the dresser.
That's
women
why
did
ladies'
it.
things
Yes.
fasten from right to left,
Why?
and gentlemen's things fasten from left to right. It's for the convenience of the maid.
Huh. That's it. There was no difference.
It's also very interesting that you are emphasizing a narrow waist, but you have literally crushed your bosom.
The bosom is lifted because we do not have brassieres yet, and so the corset pushes the bust up.
It doesn't look like it is right on top of it.
It's supposed to go straight across the center of the breast, and so it lifts. And we're very high busted in Victorian period. We have a shelf almost, very high busted. The fashion is drop shoulder. Notice that I'm drop shouldered, and it is piped at that shoulder line to help with the strain there. Wide at the temple, wide at the shoulder, and big skirt. Makes this look a lot smaller than it really is. My skirt waistband is 28 and a half, 29 inches. I know. That's the deception. If everything else is big, that's going to look smaller. This also accentuates the frailness the dependency upon being waited on and cared for, and we're such frail little creatures, you know. Part of the thinking with the corset is we were so frail we needed to be structured into something so that we could stand up. The other thinking is that if you wore one of these things for 30 or 40 years, you probably could not stand up without it because your muscles would atrophy and you could not support yourself. Now, my thinking is that I do this living history in camp, sometimes 6 weeks running in the summer. And without my corset, I would be exhausted after the first day because the clothes weigh so much that you would just be dying in the back from all the weight of the clothing. So this makes me sit up straight. It makes me breathe through my lungs and not slump over. I cannot slump. And so I do needlework and I talk to the public. We are at Mills Park this weekend. We'll be there all day today and all day tomorrow. Do come down and see us. And so we will be doing living history and visiting with the public all weekend. And without my corset, I couldn't do that because it does help me sit up straight. It does carry the weight of all the clothing. And so it makes life in camp much more tolerable. In the beginning, I didn't have a corset, and it is tiring to try to hold all this stuff together. So the corset takes away a lot of that strain. Okay, now we're going to put on your song.
You're at home dressed like this.
This is
How would you do all that?
needlework. This is what you would receive visitors. And let me tell you about visitors. You would never go to a friend's house and knock on the door and expect to be received. You go to her home and you knock on the door and the maid answers and you leave your calling card. There's a little dish for calling cards. And so you leave your calling card and that lets that person know that you wish to either visit her or you wish for her to visit you. Typically, if you wish for her to visit you, you send a note with the boy, and he delivers your invitation to tea or whatever. And so then the response is made. But if you leave your card, that means you would like to visit her, and she will send a note back letting you know when is most appropriate. So you never knock and expect to be received. You simply leave your card. Oftentimes, ladies would like to be received by someone of a little higher financial class, and sometimes you would not be invited to pay a call. And that's a real insult that you would not be received. However, you might be invited to a more of a social type of gathering rather than received as an invited guest. It might be on more of a general type of basis with other ladies. If you were invited to a tea, let's do the cake and the bonnet, and then we'll go somewhere.
So if you're at home, you spend most of the day seated.
Oftentimes, yes, we would practice our piano. We would read some of our literature. Now, this little cape is what I would put on to dress up to pay a visit. Okay, and in paying the visit, I will put my bonnet on.
Do you wear gloves?
Oh, yes, ma'am. If we still have them, we wear leather gloves. Now, I say if we still have them because I am from the South, and the blockade has eliminated a lot of things that I took for granted before the recent unpleasantness, you know. Yes.
I have a question about those little arm things you put on.
Yes, ma'am. Those are under sleeves, and they wash where the silk dress will not. They touch my skin, and so they will be laundered. They also cover up any bare skin until tea time. Nothing shows until we're ready to go to tea or receive for tea. Okay, here's the glove situation. And I did find some I can still get on. I have 2 pair of black, 3 pair of white, and they're becoming more and more scarce as the day goes by. Okay, now I'm prepared to get in the carriage and make a call on a lady friend, because I've been invited, you know. to do maybe a little bit of shopping or something like that, stop at the Mercantile, or go to the dressmaker to be measured for a new frock for the fall. And so this is the sort of thing that I would wear. I would like to point out that the bonnet is called the Mary Stuart, and it's sort of heart-shaped. And the reason for that is I made it when my husband and I renewed our vows on our 20th wedding anniversary.
Oh.
And so that's why it's heart-shaped. It is handmade. Okay, so now I'm going to show you stay at home. So get rid of the leather gloves.
Would you wear this to stroll or promenade?
Probably not in these shoes. And I would promenade in a carriage to be seen, you know. I probably would not walk in a dress this light a color because it would soil on the bottom. So we probably would pick something either with a darker underskirt and those little tab things you pull up, that the petticoat is what drags, okay? So that you're not ruining a nice piece of light colored silk. Do bear in mind that when I sew, I plan on 10 or 15 years of wear out of a dress. In Victorian period, they might have only had 3 or 4, maybe 5 dresses for the different periods of day, because in 6 months, the styles are going to change. And we don't want to be loaded down with an outdated wardrobe. And so we would not have acquired a lot of clothing in any particular season because we want the newest thing back.
How do you clean silk?
Typically, in Victorian period, there was what was called a ladies' book. We had Godey's, we had Peterson's, we had Leslie's, and they would have recipes for what would take off coal tar and what would take off axle grease. And so Joanna would see that either someone in the laundry kitchen staff or she herself would see to the well-being of my garments. And so she would make up that preparation, spot clean, when it was dry, brush it away. The gown would be turned wrong side out, taken outside, and the inside of the hem all brushed and aired before it was put back in the armoire. Now you understand that armoires were the only closet space that we had in Victorian period. Part of the reason is because we were taxed by the room in our homes, and so if it had a door on it, like a closet, it was considered a room. And so that was the purpose of the armoires, and we hadn't progressed into to closet space yet.
And the purpose of all the undergarments is so that your silk doesn't touch your skin and get all sweaty.
Exactly. And so the silk would be brushed, and it would be spot clean, and then everything that touches you would be laundered. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put the mitts on, and the mitts also keep the sun off your hands. Okay, so if you're sitting on the veranda and the sun should come around your direction, you're not going to get that browning, you know, of the skin. And also, it keeps the hands warm in the wintertime in the house, and yet you can still work. Yes, ma'am?
So when Scarlett O'Hara in the movie comes out with her dress like way down here, that was not
That's
historically.
exactly. And that's why Mammy was jerking that thing up, and you don't go around like that this early in the day. That's in poor taste, and you're going to a nice place with nice people, and you're not going to embarrass me like that. And, oh, yes, I am. I'm going to go, and I'm going to have a good time, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. So she was a little scandalous when she was 15 years old. Okay. Let's do, yes, Joanna has the button hook, and she's going to button my mitts for me.
And look at the little things she's using.
Tiny, tiny little button hook with a pearl handle, and that just slips right in there and buttons that thing just slick as the breeze.
Oh, that is really nifty. I've never
Isn't
used
that
it
cool?
before.
Okay, and now we're going to give you a special treat. We're going to show you an antique shawl. Let's show the black shawl. This is an original piece. Nothing else I've put on so far is an original piece. But this is an original Victorian shawl.
How old is it? Oh, wow.
This is probably from about 1860. There are a couple of holes. It's a little delicate, but let's lay it over. And do look at that. Isn't that the most beautiful thing? It wouldn't matter matter what I paid for it. It's worth every dime because it is so precious.
Where did you find it?
I can't even say, I don't remember with this piece. An antique shop, I'm sure. No, there was a lady who was helping to sell from an estate at one of the events we went to over in California. Fred and I used to be really active with California Civil War group until I had some surgery and couldn't sit down long enough to get there. But that's over now. But there was a lady cleaning out an estate, and she brought this into camp, and I grabbed it because it is so gorgeous and so rare to find pieces that are original.
So how can you tell the material, the age of the material? Just by the,
Isn't that the most beautiful? You can't find lace this delicate anymore. They just don't do lace work like this anymore. Isn't that the most beautiful thing? Even with the holes. Right. It is so delicate that you can't even see how fine it is until you lay it over a lighter color. This is what.
Excuse me just a minute. Linda, would you like to get up really close and look at her sleeve and stuff? Yes. Linda, thank you.
This is foil. And it has such a side to cover the bare
Something else I'm interested in is Joanna's. When you looked at your skirt, I saw a red slip.
Oh, it's in little pearls.
you would notice I'm a higher
It, hook and eye right up the front.
This is.
Hey, thank you. You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Paulette.
You're very welcome. Let's do the reticule. I have another original piece I'd like to share with you. This is a reticule. It is needlepoint, okay? And the term reticule is adopted from the French word ridiculous because ladies had nothing, they didn't need a pocket to put it in. Because we had no money, we had no rights, we couldn't vote, we had no opinion, except that was expressed by our will, you know. But we didn't speak out yet. This was the beginning of subtly moving into more and more rights because ladies were working. And it was not uncommon after the war for a woman to work and the man to go get the paycheck, and there was nothing she could do about it. Gamble it away. I would like to share with you that when a lady married, say she was upper middle class, her family had property, okay? In her dowry, she received X number of dollars, X number of horses or acres or whatever. The minute she said, I do, those became his. And if there were ever any problem in the marriage, there were a few divorces, but he could squander, sell off, give away, or whatever he wanted with what she came with, because that was his right, and there was nothing she could do about it, okay, in 1860, which is really appalling. There were happy marriages, don't get me wrong, there were happy marriages. There were marriages from love, there were marriages arranged that grew into devotedness to one another. There were miserable, locked in a room, bread and water, laudanum to make you behave as he saw fit. So there was every spectrum, but ladies were reading more, they were getting out more, they were educating themselves, they were working by Civil War, and so there was that movement, just like in Gone with the Wind. Scarlett's portrayal owning the lumber mill may have been a little bit, maybe a little bit over the edge with the mistreatment of the men that they had in chains doing the work. I think purposely that was done that way because of her determination not to starve to death after she went back to Tara and saw how terrible things were. And she had to take responsibility for two younger sisters, and she was 17 years old. So you have to do whatever you have to do. She was very, very courageous, I think, portrayed very courageously for a young woman, because a lot of them became prostitutes and did scrub work because their homes were taken away and their life as they knew it disintegrated in that war. And they had no idea how to do anything any differently. And so there's a lot of portrayals of women in the Civil War, before the Civil War, after the Civil War. Gone with the Wind sticks in everybody's mind because it was such a mega production. I think was done very well for that time in America when it was made. I think a lot of the documentation was done very well. There have been a lot of really appallingly erroneous films made since then, and there have been some good ones made since then.
So
Yes, ma'am.
what was your average lifespan? When did you die?
If you did get to be 50, you were really, really old. And so I tell everybody I'm 39. Okay, I'd like you to admire my grandmother's bracelet. I would like to share that my grandmother died when my mother was 6 years old. And so she didn't know her mother long, and I didn't know her at all. But when I do this, every time I do this, grandmother's bracelet goes along for the ride. Would you do that?
When you have the correspondence, does it encourage you to not eat?
No, what I do is I put the corset on first and then I eat, because I don't lace into this on a full stomach. Okay?
That's why the program is first today, ladies.
What?
That's why the program is first before.
Okay. The brooch was my mother's. Mother is suffering from dementia and doesn't know what day it is or where it is or whatever. And so I wear a few things in honor of people who have done this and have helped me to learn the things that I've learned.
These are all my grandma's things.
So Joanna's wearing mother's clothes.
And could you tell us about, a little bit about what she's
Okay, what she's wearing is a skirt without the hoops. Now, do understand that some servants did hoop. Some of the girls in the factories did hoop, and that contributed to that fire danger. Okay? She's not hooped so that she can get up and downstairs. If she needs to, she can kneel and do the sorts of chores that she's going to need to do today. The apron keeps the skirt from getting too soiled so that she can wear it numerous days running. Okay? She's chosen a white blouse instead of the black matching bodice today because it is summer and it does tend to get a little warm. And so she's picked the white bodice particularly, and this is a dressing occasion, and so she thought that would be appropriate. Young people are adopting now that mismatched. Even in the fashion books, you'll see young ladies wearing, perhaps a plaid skirt with a red shirt, and then the black bolero. It's called a zouave jacket in honor of the French zouave soldiers with all the braid work and the tassels and things. And so young people are adopting that, and young people are adopting men's headgear. They're wearing hats in place of our bonnets. Of course, they would never do that to church, or a tea or something like that. But for regular, perhaps promenading in the park and things, they're wearing men's headgear. And of course, us mothers think that's appalling, that they're reducing themselves to manly attire. But this is a current fashion with the young ladies. She has her brooch and her earwax, so she's dressed up for the occasion today. And also with the hairnet on her hair, she's got a little lace cap. And the purpose of the lace cap is to keep dust from settling on her hair so that she doesn't have to wash her hair so often. She's busy doing other things and doesn't have time to do that. So that keeps some of the dust off. We do brush a lot, and this also will keep the head warm near the head. It helps keep the body warm. And so if I were sitting around doing needlework and it was getting later on into the fall, I probably would wear a lace cap instead of my bonnet to stay home, just for the sake of keeping the dust out and also keeping the body heat in. Okay? Let's show the fan. This is my air conditioning, and I do have enough sense. This was brought back from Italy by my niece. I don't believe it's tortoise, I do believe it's plastic, but it is hand-painted silk. And we would sit on the veranda with our lemonade, and we would stay as still as possible during the heat of the day. We don't exert ourselves. People say to us in the park, "Aren't you hot?" And the comment is, "Well, yes, aren't you?" It's June. In the wintertime, "Aren't you cold?" Well, my wool pantalettes do that. And so the fact that I'm wearing a lot more clothing only keeps my skin from having the sun beating down on it. Most of our underclothing is cotton, and so you've got the natural fiber venting that occurs. Victorian fabrics consist of silk and wool and cotton and linen, cashmere, mohair, those sorts of things. Rayon has just been invented in very limited supply by the very, very wealthy. And so there might be a little of it in America, but probably not very much. Just to give you an idea of man-made fabrics.
And rayon is a synthetic?
Rayon is a synthetic. I don't know that. I haven't researched that. I try to document just our natural fibers. I wanted to share with you the red embroidery on the handkerchief, okay? There was a lot of tuberculosis in the 1860s, and they found that if they put red embroidery on their handkerchiefs, that if they did cough, it wasn't obvious that they were coughing blood spots onto their handkerchiefs. And so that's when we started doing the red embroidery on our handkerchiefs. What else can we talk about? It looks like it's about 11:30. Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking about your maid's outfit, did maids wear corsets?
Oh, yes, she is corseted. Oftentimes they wore what was considered a sensible stay, and it would have been numerous layers of cotton quilted in numerous directions, like the laundress, perhaps the cook, that had to do a lot of bending and reaching and those sorts of things, much more physically active than Joanna needs to be to help me with my duties in dressing. These ladies would wear a sensible stay without the wood or the steel or the whalebone, so that they could do the types of chores that they needed to do. Very good question.
Did their corsets fasten in the front so they could get into them by themselves?
They all busk in the front, they all lace in the back.
So who put that corset on?
Well, they would not pull it as tight, because they would need to be doing more bending. So
they do
it's-
it like that. Yeah.
She does her own. Okay.
What did she obviously has pantalettes on.
I have stockings, pantalettes,
And chemise.
I have all the undergarments, including the red petticoat everybody's.
More questions? What can I share with you?
How long did it take to dress from start to finish?
It takes me, well, you saw how long it takes me. It takes usually about 20 minutes if my hair's already done. If I'm simply dressing myself, it takes me about that long. I don't think I can do it in less time. But if I figure dressing my hair as well, I'm looking at a good hour.
There's a lot of good hooks and buttons.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you sit with the hood?
Good question, and these chairs are not good for that. But let me show you as best I can.
Armchairs are very good.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to get hold of the top band, right here. And I'm going to lift just gently, and then I back into the chair. Now, I would if I could.
The arms are
The reason for lifting that band is so that you allow a little flex in the back. If you simply back into a chair, it pulls down so hard, no, it doesn't flip, but it pulls down so hard you can't sit up because it's pulling on the back of the skirt. So you have to give it a little bit of flex there so that you can sit erectly when you do get back into the chair. Okay, so it's not uncomfortable unless one of the metal bands decides to stand on its edge. And then immediately you're up and adjusting because it's not comfortable at all.
And when did the hoops go out?
About 1870. This is a little bit older. This is a bell-shaped cage because I'm from the South. I was born in Mississippi, and so that's why I do a Southern impression of Civil War dressing. Bigger here. By 1862, the top two bands have been eliminated in the fashion magazines, and we're only doing banding at the bottom. So you've got more of a pyramid, cone-shaped cage. I don't know that because I'm from the South. There's a blockade. The last fashion information I have is 1861, early 62, and so I'm still wearing the same thing that I knew was popular. Okay, so we drop the top two bands, it goes into cone shape, then it becomes elliptical. You probably are familiar with the elliptical dresses also. They flatten in the front. The dresses are more cut in panels instead of straight across the fabric, and they're flattened in the front, and they're almost egg-shaped. They're longer, training in the back, and they're more of an oval. So you've got a flatter top of the egg in the front and more of a train sort of thing in the back. That's the elliptical hoop. And then we go into the bustle. And let me just share with you a little bit about the bustle. The bustle dresses were designed by Charles Frederick Worth in Paris. First of all, because there was a war in France, and the fashion industry, the silk industry was threatened. And ladies were catching on fire with these big dresses. And so he designed the bustle dress by flattening out the front and piling everything in the back. And then you need more fabric, more ribbon, more lace, more trim. And so he's helping his silk industry in France, and he's also cutting down on that risk of the fire danger in the ladies' gowns. And so he's the one who developed the bustle dress. And that was about 1870 when we go into that look. A little more freedom with these big cages that don't fit through things. The bustle simply sticks out the back. And what they do is they leave the back out of the chair, so your bustle can stick through there when you sit down. And when you're in antique shops or museums, you will see bustle chairs with no back. And that's where the bustle could extend. Question, Carrie?
Many of you know that Paulette made my Helen J. Stewart 1884 travel dress. And she is so authentic. The research was done. Jan Lovern helped us from the State Museum. But my skirt has the last of the bustles, doesn't it, Paulette? And you can't really see it. You can almost just feel it.
Just a tiny little, well, the bustle went from almost a hoop, flatter in the front, and then bands and bands and bands over a canvas frame in the back. So it was very, very big and full in the back in the 1870s. And then the end of 70, it almost fit the figure. And then the fabric was puffed up and looped and draped. Then in 1880, we came out with the tea tray bustle, which stuck straight out at least a foot in the back. And again, all the draping and trains. In 1880s, the trains were huge. So you had this great big bustle thing and then all of this fabric dragging along behind you. And then suddenly, we have the hourglass figure in the 1890s with the leg of mutton sleeves, the fitted waistline, and then A-line skirts for walking, for golf, for tennis, and all those sorts of things. So, up until we became actively involved in designing our own clothing, because of the things we were doing, besides having babies and keeping house, then we could dictate sort of how our clothing changed. I'm still coughing, I've got dust from something. More questions? Yes, ma'am?
Paulette, in what year did this full look with the hoop skirts and the 13 petticoats begin? Because
The
it's
thir-
much narrower
the
than the
13
century, wasn't it?
13 petticoats was predominant from about 1855 to about 1857, and then we started with the hoop skirts. At its zenith, 60, 61, 62, they're as big as they're going to get. Then we start tapering back down, eliminating fullness here, and then we go into that elliptical thing. So the zenith is about 1860, 61, about 7 or 8 years in the
And the
hoops.
beginning is the 1850s.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Petticoated up until then. Yes, ma'am, you had a question?
I was just wondering, you didn't really show us your stockings. How are they held up? Are they real long?
Oh, rubber garter that goes up, yes, and they do, they come all the way up, and they're round elastic. We did have elastic in 1860, and that's what it was used for. It was used for elastic in the sides of high shoes to get your foot down. Men's shoes. How many of you remember the old grandpa shoes that had the elastic gussets in the sides, okay? That's what elastic was used for in roll garters. It wasn't anything that was ever used where you saw it, but my garters are round garters, and you pull the stocking all the way up, and put the garter all the way up, and then you roll it down until you can stand it. Okay, more questions? What else can we talk about?
What about some of the things you have on the table then?
Oh, okay. This is your bathtub. Okay, on a daily basis. Pitcher and bowl. I tell the school children, it's running water. It runs as fast as you can pour it from the pitcher to the bowl. And then I ask them to imagine having to go and bring bucket after bucket after bucket of water in to fill a tub. That's why you didn't get in the tub. Maybe once in a while. But this was every morning, you got out of bed, you washed your face, and, did whatever you had to do to get on with your daily activities. Let's show the little soap dish. This is an original piece. This belonged to the grandmother of a friend in our Civil War group. And when I started setting out the ladies' dressing table, this was given to me as one of my props. And you can see it has the little ridges. It is, in fact, a Victorian soap dish. And I've put a nice little jasmine soap in so that it smells nice also. We have a couple of really nice hand-done hand towels. And these also from the same friend. As an estate was cleaned out, he shared with me a few pieces. Here's our brush, so we don't have to shampoo, ladies, okay? And this was my mother's. And so when we started cleaning out her house, I thought my dressing table probably needed Mama's silver brush and comb set, so that's why I have these pieces. And these are displayed in my tent. I set up a typical ladies' living area in my tent down in Mills Park. And I will have the cot and the handmade quilt on it, and then I have a dressing table, and I put the dressing screen up, and I have Miss Magnolia, and she's a dress form, and she will be attired in the appropriate underthings so that people can see what we do have under our clothing. And we're working on a quilt in our camp this weekend, and will be throughout the summer. And the quilt will, we're going to sell drawing tickets on the quilt, and the quilt will be awarded at our Valentine's Ball in February. So we have the opportunity to buy tickets this weekend, and we encourage anybody to come by and tie a couple of ties in the quilt. It's going to be tied, and it will be displayed in Virginia City in August, and it will be displayed in Winnemucca in September, and it will be displayed at Fort Churchill in October. And we're hoping by then to have it finished, and then we can get the hem put in it, and the drawing will be mid-February sometime. So do come by. The pattern is Grandmother's Fan, and so we'd like everybody to come by and see what we do in camp. The fellows shoot their guns and all that sort of thing. We even have ladies in a hospital setting this time. We have sanitary commission and all that. So come down if you can. We'd love to have you visit us. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about bathing. I
Mhm.
understand in England, people didn't bathe ever.
Well,
Because
that's,
they would be exposed to the elements. and
Exactly,
get killed and
exactly.
That sort of thing. Why were the Americans more enlightened?
I think probably because we were more free-thinking, and I think as we established our home, we may have had to work harder and needed a bath more than some of the Europeans and the English. And there were dictates that old people did not change how they did things. There are pictures of little old ladies in 1860, and they've got these ringlets from 1840, and they're not giving them up. And that's just how it's going to be. You know, she's still wearing the same dress style. Has them made 20 years too old when they're brand new, because she likes that style, and that's what she's wearing. And so there is documentation in that from the pictures. And I think that holds true with a lot of our customs. I think the new medical research was proving that cleanliness did help. A lot of the young doctors were scoffed at and not listened to when they graduated from medical school, and tried to tell the older surgeons what they had learned about even washing their hands. And I think a lot of that was adopted by young mothers with seeing that their children were kept cleaner and trying to avoid illnesses and that sort of thing. Weather. Yes, also weather, because in the South you probably would want to freshen up more often than you would in New England. We did not exert ourselves during the heat of the day. We did wear thinner fabrics. It was not uncommon to have a shearer dress with a shawl or something over until later in the afternoon, because it was so warm and humid in the South. Okay? One of the things I like to share is that doctors were only practicing medicine, and we didn't want them practicing on us. And so we adhered to the recipes in the ladies' books again, that told about tonics that you could ingest if you were feeling poorly, or liniments you could rub on, or poultices, mustard plasters, and that sort of thing. So we did treat ourselves, oftentimes because doctors were not readily available in rural settings, and oftentimes because we weren't sure what they were using to treat us, okay? Oftentimes the doctor was blamed for the outcome after surgeries or after childbirth and things, and oftentimes it wasn't anything he could have done anything about, but they were not as well educated. And like I say, with the older doctors, oftentimes they would not listen to what younger students of medicine had learned and research that had been documented. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that you only would have 4 or 5 outfits because you're going to be changing and updating. But the fabrics were expensive, and so what happened to the old things? Were they refashioned for the
They could be,
children,
yes,
or-
they could be refashioned. Oftentimes, a dress was reduced from an afternoon gown or day dress into something more that you would work in to assist with some of the chores. Smaller hoop or no hoop. And after the bottom was soiled, shortened a little bit so that you could use it for something else. Oftentimes servants were paid off with a dress that they had no use for, but there was nothing they could do. If they quit, you wrote a letter stating that they were unfavorable help and they could not obtain another position. And so oftentimes they were paid off with a garment. Sometimes it was a garment they desired and they would work it off. And sometimes it was just passed along to someone who maybe couldn't afford newer things, perhaps a poor relative or something that didn't have any better. Yes, ma'am.
Now, you said that after 3 they could expose their skin. How much skin would they expose?
If it were, in fact, a tea, garden party, something like that, the undersleeves would come out, my skin would show underneath this. We would have either a V neckline, perhaps a square neckline that was trimmed, and a necklace or something that would show here. It could come, yes, it could come as far as cleavage is concerned. You know, ball gowns have just the tiniest little bit of sleeve, and they're very, very low. They say that the neckline descended with the setting sun. And so it depended on whether you had anything to show, I suppose. How brazen you felt like being. And the styles of the gowns. You know, there were dictates early, mid-1850s. The gown was cut almost straight across for a ball gown. Tip of the shoulder is where the neckline would stop, but it wasn't very low. And then into the 60s, it did go lower. And then we went back up with the really high collar in the 90s. necklines did go up and down. But V-neck, square neck, kind of a scoop is acceptable after the 3, 4 o'clock tea time. And shorter sleeves, more open sleeves, to allow a little bit of that afternoon breeze and to adorn more. We used a lot more lace, a lot more trim and that sort of thing later in the day. Okay, more questions? What else can we talk about?
How about some of the other things on your little table?
Okay, let me show you hat pins. One of the questions that the school children have trouble with concept of hat pins. And I just tell them, well, you know, it's like pierced ears. You get used to where the hole goes through there and then it doesn't bother you. Typically, in the time frame that I reflect, we don't need a hat pin because our hair is down very, very low and the bonnet goes on. So you don't need a hat pin. But when the young women start wearing these hats, they blow away. And so, hair is starting to kind of move up off the back of the neck a little bit. And the hat pin would go through the chignon or bun or whatever hairstyle you have, and that's what would hold the hat on. And so these were very fashionable. They're collector's items now. I have some original pieces and some that are reproduction in there. I do have, these are my mother's little spectacles. And this is typical of 1860 glasses. My mother bought these and had her prescription put in. And then mother had cataract surgery and she didn't really need them anymore. But these are typical, little bent wires that you have to hook one at a time. Very typical 1860s glasses. So
We back those now. Little metal glass.
These sit on my sewing table in camp.
You know, Paulette, you also mentioned your earrings. Did you have pierced ears?
Oh, yes, we did. And let me show you, just pass them around. This is typical, these are original Victorian earrings. And notice the French wire, the way these are made. This is typical of an 1860 earring. What else do we have over here? Give me the towel. Because we have no deodorant yet, ladies, we use a lot of cologne, perfume, rose water things. This is scented talc. And we used a lot of talc to keep us dry, you know, and to kind of help us stand ourselves until we could wash the next time. So this is a little silver-topped shaker, and it does have citrus floral talc inside it. And I use a lot of talc when I dress because it does help kind of keep you drier. So I have gardenia talc tucked in all of my carpet bags and everything, so I have a little bit of something I can fluff on in between dressing. Okay, this is a sewing box, and inside I have an original vegetable ivory. This is not real ivory. This is made from a vegetable product. Let's pass these around. That's a little pin cushion. Okay, this one is a little tape measure. And you can pull it out, just be really careful when you rewind it because it's a little bit fragile. And this one is a needle case. I'm going to give you this piece back. This my husband gave me for Christmas 2 years ago. And you can see it's gold and it has little stones and some darling little flowers on it. And it opens up. Our needles were very precious. They were expensive and they rusted quite easily. And so we always had some sort of little case to keep our needles in. You want to pass that direction? Pass that around. Jewelry. Let's talk jewelry for just a moment. If we had it, ladies, we wore it. It didn't matter if it matched. It didn't matter if you wore a brooch and a necklace and your watch and 2 or 3 bracelets and rings and earbobs. So oftentimes that was another show. In addition to the width of your hoop showed your financial stability. The quality of the silk that you spent yards and yards and yards to have a gown created to go over that hoop. That was another show of what you could afford to waste on one gown. And the jewels. Like I say, if you had them, you wore them in combination. We weren't careful not to be ostentatious. We did in fact wear what we had. So that was common. And like I say, it didn't necessarily match. You could wear rubies and emeralds together or whatever you chose. These are gold filled, and I got these down in Carson, I believe. No, it was an antique shop in Reno. But these are original Victorian earrings. Sure.
And when did they start piercing ears?
I don't know, because they were wearing pierced ears in 1860, and I haven't tracked back any further, but that was common practice in 1860.
And who did the piercing?
It probably was kitchen help, probably. I've heard of freezing the ear with ice and then putting a potato behind and sticking the needle through the potato. I've heard of broom straw put in to be oiled and turned until the healing was done. I had mine done with a gun, so. She had her ears pierced when she was 7 years old, and they were done by hand. And I thought, you know what, if my little girl can do it, I can do it. And that's when I had my ears pierced.
It was a lot less painful. I had the upper holes done with a gun, and it was very painful, and I had a headache for a long time. The lower holes, I didn't.
See, I wasn't brave enough to have that.
So did they have them pierced as adults or as children?
I don't know. I believe as children, but I think they would have waited for the child to decide. I don't think they were shot when they were 3 days old, like you see people doing now. I think it was a decision the child made.
How many piercings per ear?
Just one. Just one in Victorian period. Yes, ma'am.
I wondered, do you, is it an 1860s thing to have the hair receiver and braid the hair, or is that later?
Oh, no. Very much so in fashion. And the hair pictures with all the braid work on the wire and the twisting of the hair into art form was very popular in the 1860s, especially as a memorial, as a commemorative to someone who had passed, or an accumulation of all the family members of doing some sort of picture in hair. Bowers Mansion has an example that is just magnificent. And they said that the percentages might have been 3 or 4% of the population might have been blonde, and the rest of us were not. And so most of the hair is dark in these presentations. Now, I have a lovely little brooch that's a little gold frame, and it had a picture in it. And Joanna took her hair and did basket weave of her hair for the background. And then she took my mother's gray hair, and she braided it around the wire and shaped it in a P for Paulette, and has that mounted in that little brooch for me. So I have my mom's hair and my daughter's hair in the brooch. So that's very special to me. Are there any other questions? What else can we share?
Oh, Paula, this has just been absolutely wonderful.
Well, thank you.
And now, when you eat lunch, are you going to eat in that group? Do I need to get you a chair without arms for lunch, or?
I can manage, Holly.
Okay, because I'm sure we can find you.
Yes, Carrie.
I just want everyone to know that after working with Paulette 5 years ago and doing my costume and hearing her give a presentation at Gold Hill, we put her in our Hall of Fame at our conferences.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel she deserves it.
Yes.
The Veterans History Project Hall of Fame is for women who have contributed to information about the history of women.
And I am very honored. Very, very honored. Yes, ma'am.
Another question. In the 1860s, how much would you have paid your maid, your lady's maid, is that what she's called?
Perhaps $1 a day, and that was generous.
Plus room and board because she lived in your home?
Not necessarily. She may have her own home and family that she has to attend after I dispense her from her services to me. Oftentimes that was 7 days a week, 12, 14 hours a day. And then she would have to either have children big enough to help her, or she would have to do a lot of her own chores after she got home. Oftentimes they did reside close on the property. Oftentimes there were cottages, even along California Avenue. There are cottages where either servants or visiting family would come and stay. And so there were a lot of different types of lifestyles. That's a good question. Let me just let you know that I do custom sewing as my livelihood. That's who I really am, in addition to being a seamstress and a milliner as my presentation for the Civil War reenactments. But I do reproduce Victorian clothing accurate to a fault because I'm that picky. And I do regular sewing also, but Victorian is my true love. And so I sew for a lot of different time frames. I've gone back as far as 1840 and forward as far as 1911 for Jane Ford's gown that I made for her. So humor me just a moment to thank my daughter Joanna, my son-in-law Tim,